Oh, life support. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, crickets. Chirp, 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 chirp. Okay, another round of coffee for everybody. We are continuing our study of the Gospel of John. And we are on chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus. Before that, and I know I did this before, but she wasn't here. A couple weeks ago, Nancy had a question when we looked at Ezekiel 34. You remember? Vaguely. Okay. Well, it was Ezekiel 34.
And I don't have my own scripture this morning that had the different.
That had the different. Oh, that's okay. Trying to find where it's basically his judgment against the shepherds. Well, the difference was in one translation it says, I will destroy, and another translation reads, I will keep watch. And it's referring to the bad shepherds. Why that difference in translation? I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. It has to do with the biblical texts that we have are copies of the originals. Now, what happens when you copy something, every now and then, especially if your eyes aren't the best, you can, I mean, we all do this, don't we? We misspell a word, or, I think a lot of teachers would say whenever you're writing on the board, invariably you're going to misspell something at some point, for whatever reason. And most of these differences, there are some rules that those who deal with these different manuscripts deal with, that you can pretty much identify where the boo-boo was and establish what was originally written. Every now and then you get it where, it's a judgment call. But usually it's not a sort of a big deal. Most of these differences can be explained. This one, it has to do with the word, two different words that look very similar. And I should do that. Actually, I'll do this smaller. And this is Hebrew, so you can't read it anyway, but it gets the point across. That would help if I didn't spell it backwards. Okay, so right now, both are identical. The last letter, though, they look very similar, don't they? In fact, maybe from that distance, depending on your eyesight, they almost look the same. So if you're copying along from one to the next, there's a chance that, let's say it originally says this, that you may mistakenly write this as you copy. And that's basically what's happened here. All right? Well, this word is ashmid, which means to destroy. This ashmir, this is basically the D, and that's an R. Ashmid, ashmir. Ashmid means to destroy. Ashmir means to watch, or has to do with vision, watching over. And so that's why you have the different translations, and it gives in the history that the Targum, which is later rabbinic commentary, agrees with the Masoretic text, which the Masoretic text is scribes that make copies of earlier copies called the Masoretes. And the up until the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest manuscript that we had of the Old Testament that was complete is dated to 1000 AD. Codex Leningradensis. And it's called that because usually these are called according to the library that they're at or location. So it was found in Russia, Leningrad, so it gets that name. And
how did the Hebrew text get all the way up to Russia and Leningrad?
Russian Jews. There's a lot of, the Jewish population dispersed out, and so they would, carry their Torah scrolls, their manuscripts with them. And as they wore out, they would copy them. Or as they needed more, they would copy them. So the Targum and the Masoretic text, and also Luther, apparently read, "I will keep watch." But you have some other versions there are other versions, and I'm not sure, I'm just glancing here, but Dead Sea Scrolls came to light in the 40s, 50s, and by and large showed that the Masoretes who copied these texts were extremely faithful. They had a whole system that they used where, and it's in a Hebrew Bible, it shows it sort of at the end, they count, there's that many letters in the book. So when you get done copying, you have to count up all the letters to make sure you have the right number of letters. Plus, they also indicate what the very center word is, and I think also the central letter. So it's a check system. So king. So as you go through the manuscript to proof it, that better be the middle word. Otherwise, you made a mistake, right? Not all mistakes get caught. The sort of the difference of meaning, destroy is pretty obvious. The I will keep watch, it's sort of, I'm watching you. And so there's the answer to your question. You're welcome. I like answering questions. Makes me look smart.
Oh, Pastor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to say, this nurse we have today, we had her yesterday and Friday. And,
Yeah.
we're having her tomorrow and Tuesday. Our regular nurse won't be back till Wednesday.
Right.
And, anyway, she asked me yesterday what church I go to. I told her Grace Lutheran.
Okay.
So today I asked her where she goes to. She said, I don't go to church at the moment.
Oh, really? Well,
And I said to her, do you believe? And she says, yes, she believes, but she has to work every weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes it hard. A lot of people working on weekends. Yeah.
But at Fairway grocery store, they're off on Sundays and holidays.
Yep, there are certain businesses, usually Christian run, that take those days off. Okay, John 11, which is very timely because it's the story, it takes up the whole chapter. And for the sake of time, we're not going to read through it. Hopefully you're familiar with this story, the raising of Lazarus. And let's break this down a little bit. We're going to go based on your familiarity. Who are the who, what, why, where, when, and how? Who are the various characters in this story? Kind of scan through and...
Mary and her sister Martha.
Okay, you have Mary and Martha. Sisters. There's an old Rosemary Clooney thing. Yeah. Da, 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 da. Okay, don't go messing with my mister and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Who else? Lazarus, yes. Lazarus. Jesus, of course, is in here. And who's along with Jesus? His disciples. And I believe, if I remember right, you have, and this is interesting, I guess, especially with our text today, one of his disciples leading up to going has something to say. Who speaks? Thomas. Yeah, we had Thomas today in our gospel reading, and he's gotten the name Doubting Thomas, and I think that's a bit unfair to Thomas, but Doubting Thomas. Here, if you found it, what does Thomas say?
He said, let us also go that we may die with him.
Right. Some of the other guys will say, hey, this is a dangerous place. Because remember John 8, and then at the end of John 8, they tried to stone Jesus. You had John 9 and 10, and they weren't really happy with him. Yes, Rita?
Well, and as far as who is in this chapter, there generally are Jews that come along too.
Yep. There are Jews, and I think they're from Jerusalem because where they're at is in Bethany, not far, I think it's Bethany, not far from Jerusalem.
Yeah, they came along with Mary.
They came along to comfort Mary and Martha. So, odds are relatives and friends, just like at funerals today, but there are also probably some others. You get a sense that there were others as well. And, we don't know a whole lot about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, but, the digs that they lived in, they were big enough to host Jesus and these 12 other guys, right? And Mary, if I remember correctly, she's the one who brings out the costly, very expensive perfume that could have been sold. They harp on her for, I think it's 200 denarius. A denarius was a day's wage for a common laborer. So this is very expensive, which suggests that Lazarus was probably fairly well healed. Probably wealthy, yeah. He was probably pretty wealthy, that, Mary would have had the disposable income to purchase this very expensive perfume, this ointment. And as wealthy people are, was probably fairly well known, maybe a fairly influential person. And when, fairly well known, fairly influential people die, others show up to the funeral, right? So these are the main characters in this story. And Mary and Martha, friends of Jesus, and Lazarus is described as a friend of Jesus. There's a pretty good chance that Lazarus and Mary and Martha, it seems that they hosted Jesus and his disciples on more than one occasion. I believe it's in Luke's gospel where Mary and Martha show up and Jesus is teaching. Mary is listening and Martha is stuck doing all the prep work. And she complains to Jesus, "Hey, talk to my sister. I'm doing all this work and she's just sitting here." Right? Okay, how many of us, okay, you ladies, it tends to be this way in churches. Typically, who's in charge of the food and setting the tables and cleaning the tables and doing the dishes? The ladies. That's right. And you might get a little frustrated with the guys sitting around drinking coffee. Well, Mary chooses the better part. She's listening to Jesus teach. All that other stuff could wait. Okay, as with any good story, there's a problem that comes up. What is the problem? Yeah, well, before he dies, he's sick. Yeah, Lazarus is sick. And it's a sickness unto death, gravely ill. And Jesus and his disciples are in, I believe it's Ephraim, town in Ephraim. Anyway, they weren't that close by, but Mary and Martha knew where Jesus and his disciples were at, so they send for him. So Lazarus, here we have a need. Sickness is always a consequence of, at the very root of it, of sin. Now, as we learned with the man born blind, it's not necessarily a cause and effect relationship where, who was born blind, this man or his parents that he was born blind. Sometimes we can draw that, if you do this, you will have this health problem. If you smoke like a chimney, odds are you're going to get cancer. If you eat a high-fat diet, odds are you're going to develop arteriosclerosis and need some heart stents. If you overdo it on the sugar, what's going to happen? You get diabetes. You might get diabetes, and especially if you already have diabetes and you overdo the sugar, what's going to happen? You'll need insulin. And if you really overdo the sugar, you go into a diabetic coma, right? So, but at But, a child that gets leukemia, did that child sin? No. Did the parents sin, and is God punishing the parents? No. Is sin the root cause? Yeah, we live in a fallen world. God did not create Adam and Eve to die. Adam and Eve's sinful rebellion brought death into the world. So Lazarus is sick, and it's sickness unto death. Mary and Martha, they send to Jesus. What do we call this when you basically send a message to Jesus for help? Prayer. That's very good, yeah. So Mary and Martha they send a prayer. If we want to talk in that type of language, they send a petition to Jesus to come and heal their sick brother. And what kind of prayer would we call this? Intercession. It's an intercessory prayer because they're praying on behalf of someone else and their need. And so we offer up intercessory prayers individually as Christians and collectively as a congregation. Well, the message gets to Jesus. And how does Jesus respond?
Well, at first he says it won't end in death.
Well, actually, I think he says the opposite, doesn't he?
No, in verse 4 he says it will not end in death.
Will not end in death. Let me look here. Verse 4.
But just like it was for the blind man, this is to bring glory to God.
Right. In order to bring glory to the Son of God through him. Yeah, it's okay.
But he still states that where he was for 2 more days, he didn't come right away.
There you go. Jesus postpones. He doesn't answer right away, does he?
He didn't need to.
Well, he didn't need to.
Because he knew the end of the story.
He knew. Well, that's the thing. Jesus knew the end of the story.
That's what 4 says.
Yeah.
The sickness will not end in death. But you don't get to know the exact time, so I'm going to stay here for a couple of days.
Now, that's from Jesus' side. He knows the end of the story. But what about Mary and Martha? Do they know or Lazarus? They don't know the end of the story. Now, they would have had an idea, roughly, how long it would take for Jesus and his disciples to go from point A to point B. And they've prayed, they've sent a message to Jesus, and they are waiting.
Yeah, God doesn't always answer our prayers when we want it, but it's his time.
Exactly. Now, prayer is the language of faith. And that ties into the first commandment. Luther, in his large catechism, he says, what does it mean to have a God, or what is a God? A God is one from whom or from whatever you seek all good, and to which you run in every kind of danger. That's a God. So by praying to Jesus, faith fulfills the commandment. They trust that Jesus hears their prayer. They're going to him for trouble. They're expecting good from him. But Jesus postpones. And this can be a bit difficult, but it helps us understand. Step into the text. And you can step into the text as any of the characters. Now, all of you who are here right now, but some of you may have faced a life-threatening illness, right? Yeah. And you've prayed. And you've waited. And waited. And waited.
We want it all right now, and God doesn't work that way.
No, he doesn't. And it's very easy if you're not in the situation to say that. But if you're in that situation yourself, it is a true... What impact does that have on faith? Test. Yeah. Faith is tested. And you're torn between faith and what is unseen and doubt, which I'm going to put seen, but it's what you're experiencing. It's what you experience, the reality that you are experiencing. There is a great quote that I memorized from Martin Luther out of his lectures on Genesis. He said, the Christian faith is one that has a definite promise. It's guaranteed. God's guaranteed it with his own word. The Christian life is one that has a definite promise, but the fulfillment of that promise is postponed. We don't get it right away. And this is the real kicker, the very opposite comes to pass. Lazarus dies. So you get Lazarus, put yourself in the position of Mary and Martha. Lazarus is dying. And you're praying. And where's Jesus? He should be here by now. He's had enough time. Why isn't he here yet? All kinds of questions arise in our minds that attack our faith. And then the very opposite comes to pass. Lazarus dies. A Christian, and this is the difficult part about faith, a Christian still believes.
Yeah, and my Bible verse for confirmation, that was March 22nd on Palm Sunday, 1964.
Yeah.
And after all these years, I still remember my verse, "Be thou faithful unto death, and thou shalt give thee a crown of life."
That's right. You don't... The Christian life is one that has a definite promise, but the fulfillment of that promise is postponed, and the very opposite comes to pass. And yet faith still clings to the promise. Because God is true, God is not a liar. So even though the very opposite comes to pass, and it appears as though God's promise was actually a lie or an empty promise, you still cling to the promise. It was interesting. This was one of the texts that when I was in South Sudan, teaching a class on the Gospel of John to future pastors in South Sudan, I said, okay, put yourself in a pastoral situation, and you are ministering to Lazarus. And let's say, someone is dying. What do you say to Lazarus? Or you're ministering to Mary and Martha while Lazarus is still living, or you show up after he's died. You show up to the home and you're there with the family after their loved one has died. What do you say based on this text? And bless them, they would say some sort of generic, true, but generic Christian statement. God loves you, or something like that. And I said, yeah, that's true. That's not wrong. But how would you use this particular text to comfort them? And it took a while before it registered that I wanted them to use this particular text and what's in this particular text to bring comfort to the family, as opposed to some sort of general gospel statement. We are about at the end of our time here. We've kind of jumped around a bit, but we'll pick up on this next week and maybe another week. We'll have to see, because covers the whole chapter. But and it's a very rich text, very appropriate for this time of year because it teaches the resurrection. And this is in the Gospel of John. They usually divide the Gospel of John up divide it into the book of signs and the book of glory. So the first half-ish, Jesus is performing all of these different signs, chapters 1 through 12. And then 13 through 21 is Jesus' glorification, his death and resurrection. That's how they generally subdivide it. Well, if you look at these signs, you have the water to wine. You have the healing of the centurion's servant. You have the stilling the storm. And I'm not going to get all of these, but you have the healing the lame man, the paralytic. You have the feeding the 5,000. You have the healing of the blind man. And then you have raising Lazarus. Is it AS or US? US, okay, Lazarus. You can look at this, well, one of two ways. You have a crescendo, where there's each one, or if you want to think of it as, steps, getting higher and higher. It's building momentum. One sign is greater than the one before it, which is greater than the one before it, which is greater than the one before it. And like I said, two ways. You could also look at the water into wine as sort of I like drum rolls where you have, so the initial snap, or not. But all these together are pointing ahead to Jesus' greatest sign, and they help us understand. These are foreshadowing Jesus' glorification on the cross, and then his resurrection, all wrapped up together. And you can think of these as fruits of Jesus' passion. This is what Jesus achieves. These are all temporary, right? But what he achieves is eternal. And this comes up, the different sicknesses, especially the physical ones, have to do with physical death, right? And they are a reflection or I don't know if symbol is the best word, but of a spiritual malady. So blindness, physical blindness, but there's also spiritual blindness, isn't there? There's physical paralysis and also spiritual paralysis. There's physical sickness and there's a spiritual sickness. And then sickness unto death itself. The biggie is death. And here, Jesus reveals himself as stronger, or the master of, over sickness, over the natural world, stilling of the storm, over physical paralysis. He multiplies bread and loaves. He's able to open the eyes of the dead. On top of this, he's able to raise a man back to life. Jesus is the light of the world. He's the bread of life. He's the resurrection and the life. He's the good wine. He's the creator. So all this builds up, and from this, these are temporary, but what is permanent flows from the cross. These foreshadow Jesus' death and resurrection, and then the spiritual and eternal benefits of his death and resurrection. Spiritual sight, spiritual healing of paralysis, spiritual, feeding, all of these things. So anyway, I need to stop there. We'll pick this up next time. And like I said, next week and maybe a week after. So between now and then, go ahead and read through chapter 11. God's blessings.